Hello and welcome to Lexplosion's panel discussion on safeguarding protections laid down under the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013, more popularly known as the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, in light of the current work from home scenario. Now, over the past 9 months, the world as we know it has turned upside down. Assumptions made in various constructs, including legislative constructs, no longer hold true. For example, the definition of workplace as, in the current world, where a large number of people have been working from domestic setups for almost 9 months and is likely to continue for a fairly longish time. How does the word workplace in that construct get defined is something that needs to be worked upon. As a matter of fact, a number of businesses, including several of our clients, have been expressing their intention to continue to allow their employees to work from home for much longer periods. And while that is generally welcome and there are clear advantages of that, there are certain unfortunate downsides which some of our clients and colleagues in those companies have been talking about in more recent times of how to handle sexual harassment related complaints that are happening because of so many people working remotely with limited contact to leadership, limited view to how to raise concerns, what qualifies as a concern in this strange environment. So all of those are questions that have been coming to us, and we thought that it's best that we try to address them by bringing in the experts who are working in the space, who have the experience of being able to respond appropriately to the queries that have been coming up. So that is the purpose of today's session. I'd like to introduce you to the three panelists, starting with Sonal Mattoo. Sonal is a lawyer specializing in compliance relating to workplace harassment and diversity issues and has 2.5 decades of experience in this space. She supports various clients as an independent ombudsperson, handling employee complaints via the internal dispute resolution mechanism, and as an independent IC member for the prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace issues. She's also the founder director of Helping Hands, an organization specializing in issues pertaining to women at the workplace. Sonal is a graduate of National Law School, Bangalore. We then have Anandita Jaiswal, who's a HR specialist with Dell Technology. Anandita works with the team specializing in business partnering, HR consulting, talent development, employee engagement, organizational development, and leadership effectiveness. She focuses on leveraging technology, integrated workplace, and data-driven insights to create sustainable solutions to scale. Prior to Dell, Anandita has worked in various industries, including healthcare and telecom. She has over 12 years of experience in the field of HR. And finally, we have Ritu Jain, the Chief Compliance Officer for GE Asia. She's responsible for GE's compliance strategies in this region. Her role includes identifying emerging compliance trends and regulatory and policy issues that may impact GE's operations. She works with the regional government relations and legal teams to identify regulatory issues impacting the region and helps implement appropriate policies. Ritu is a BCom Honours graduate from the prestigious Sriram College of Commerce, Delhi University, and completed her MBA from Symbiosis Pune. I'm Indranil Choudhury, the CEO of Lexplosion. I'll be moderating today's session. Before we move on, first of all, thank you to all three of you for taking the time out. It really means a lot to us, and I'm sure your inputs will be of great value to the audience today. Also wanted to highlight that this session is being recorded in advance and is being telecast at this time. Three of us, that's Ritu, Anandita, and I, will be present to take any questions that you have during the session. If you have any questions which you want to address to Sonal, she'll take them offline. With that, if it's okay, Sonal, I would like to start by asking you, with all the different, sessions that you're now attending, as a member of the IC, as an ombudsperson, what are the key differences in the natures of sexual harassment cases that are being reported post-lockdown in this last, 8-9 months?
So Indranil, when the lockdown was imposed end of March, for the first month thereafter, we didn't really see too many. We saw no cases. What we were looking at was the backlog that had come to us that we were already in the process of conducting inquiries into. And I think there was that confusion of, settling things down, adjusting to this new style of working. And then a month and a half or so into the lockdown, a spate of virtual harassment cases started to come our way. This was right from the kind of inappropriate comments that were being made over calls to just people being very inappropriately dressed on calls. And, this was a new world for all of us. So I'm not saying that it was all deliberate. There were some genuine errors and mistakes. But it also went on to this using WhatsApp in a manner that was extremely unprofessional, doing video calls with lady colleagues late at night, asking them to put their cameras on. These were unscheduled calls. So initially, we started to get more cases around that area. And then it just blew into this sending porn on WhatsApp groups, sending inappropriate messages and texts, just writing rubbish to people, being in an inebriate condition and calling up team members and talking rubbish. So the initial few cases that we saw, and some of them were so bad that we actually contemplated support going out and filing an FIR, because a lot of these women were getting these calls. They would put the camera, the phone on, and there would be somebody sitting stark naked on the other side of the lines. Stuff we hadn't seen earlier. You didn't get that kind of case earlier. And then after this spate of virtual harassment cases, we went on to a very disturbing trend where, because the manpower and population in offices was minimal, we started to get a lot of cases from third party vendors present on the site. They are on contract. This is a supervisor. They're not as well versed with the law or as aware as we are. They're scared to speak up. So I think trickling this information down to those who may not have access to English, posters and things like that, that's really what I thought the need of the hour was, given the kind of cases that we got.
That's extremely insightful, Sonal, and that's what we have been reading as well, and hearing from some of our other clients about how the people's behavioral patterns have changed. People who seem to be absolutely proper conduct and well behaved in an office environment started suddenly showing traits which weren't common, or which weren't at least expected of those people, and that quite surprised both the colleagues as well as the leadership, because they never expected some people to behave in that manner. So if I can come to you, Ritu, as somebody who's obviously handling this entire compliance program, which includes this whole prevention of sexual harassment related issues, what kind of internal dynamic have you had to deal with, and what kind of changes to, for example, your sensitization programs, your training programs, have you had to therefore bring about as a result of these changes, which obviously initially emanates from the fact that most people are now working from home?
Yeah, Indranil. So first of all, thanks for having us on this panel. Really insightful to begin with. I agree with Sonal. When we started in a lockdown mode, we actually saw a huge dip in the number of concerns being reported in general, not just harassment, but across the board. And I think people were just taking the time to adjust. As and when things started to feel like, okay, this is the new normal, we initially we had to be very, very proactive as an HR, compliance, a leadership team, just to reach out to employees to remind them that, look, the channels are still open. You can still face these issues. And what we had to do is we had to calibrate our communication in the new context, which means that we had to give examples to people which probably didn't exist before, in terms of what kind of issues could you see now that you're working virtually. And therefore, these are the types of issues, if you're seeing, you must come forward, talk about it. There are, I think, two aspects when you're working virtually. On one hand, you may feel, if you are like a perpetrator or you are indulging in misconduct, you may feel like nobody's watching. So you may get a little bit more encouragement or confidence to indulge in that sort of misconduct. On the other side, if you are observing that misconduct or you are the victim, then you may actually feel uncomfortable because you don't really know, what's the best way to tell somebody. I think people generally feel more comfortable when they have somebody to talk to. So we had to address both of those aspects in terms of what is incorrect, inappropriate behavior when you're working virtually. not just from a goal of sexual harassment, but also, thinking broadly, what is the etiquette when you're working remotely, right? When you're interacting with people in a virtual setting, how do you use our systems, social media, phones? All of a sudden we were very worried that people would move away from company authorized platforms to platforms like WhatsApp. And then, a little bit of an informality sets in and people are more comfortable sharing information or inappropriate material. So we had to reset that entire communication very proactively to remind people of their obligations, to remind them of what the do's and don'ts when you're interacting with colleagues and business associates. And then to address the other side, we had to now reach out to people maybe in a smaller group setting, trickle down a lot of communication through people leaders, because those were the people employees were interacting with. It's very hard for an HR function or a compliance function to reach out to thousands of employees and sort of have that personal connect, which of course is very hard to replace when compared to when you're in a physical setting. So I think those small group touch points just were intended to remind people that they should report concerns. And we definitely saw the impact. I mean, after the first few months, we saw that people, as they sort of settled in, they got reminded, they started coming up with the issues, and we got back to sort of a pre-lockdown levels in terms of the concerns that we started seeing. So that was really our strategy on dealing with that interim period.
Sure. Anandita, in a similar vein, both Sonal and Ritu mentioned about WhatsApp, which is essentially a private social media in some form. It is not really something that any of your organizations, I'm sure, officially encourage people to use for communication. And there are others. For example, I was recently told about a case where a particular employee had been expressly advised not to communicate with a lady because he had been found to have stalked her at some point in the past, and he went ahead and and stalked her in office, so in an office setup, but now in a work from home environment, started following her on Twitter. And this lady was extremely uncomfortable with being followed by the same person, and raised a concern. How does an organization deal with something like this? Because Twitter is an open forum. You are reasonably free to follow whoever you want to, and that's how the whole that medium works. Similarly, WhatsApp, unless you've expressly blocked somebody, it allows you to send a message. And but just the fact that some people who you have historically had discomfort with because of their behavior in the past, you might not want to receive any communication from them whatsoever. Just the concept of having a word from them might lead to a panic attack. So how does one deal with that? What kind of messaging does an organization like yours do, or generally as a concept, how do corporates deal with this?
Sure, Indranil. Thank you very much, okay, for first of all adding me to this panelist, okay. To your question, Indranil, first I would like to focus on the conception that workplace used to define earlier, this pro-COVID era, it is defined as by brick and the walls, has become partial. Nowadays, the workplace has become more dynamic, and that kind of dynamic change, we need to have it in employee understanding. So similarly, to your point, strict norms we need as an organization, all the organization, in fact, they need to adopt to ensure an office decorum should be there. And that regular training on the awareness session should be conducted on time to time basis to the employee sensitization, and also to educate them on the redressal mechanism, specifically to the female employees, if in case any such kinds of incidents happening related to sexual harassment. So in the virtual space or virtual environment, what should be the next step is one of the has become far more important for any organization or for any industry. To your point, if any female employees who have in past have not been certain comfortable position in any one of the colleague, so, and that colleague is again approaching her and troubling her and is creating a nuisance for that lady, I think that's for any organization, it's any such behavior, it's clearly a violation of any organization code of conduct and has to be taken very seriously. Specifically, it should be constituted as a misconduct, and a violation like this is not at all acceptable. So there should be proper investigation and based on any organization ethics guideline. So the steps has to be taken to take it further and to have a strict punishment against it. So yeah.
So so Sonal, GE, Dell, all large organizations, many others, they've been extremely proud of their culture. So there is, anybody who's a part of GE, and I used to work there myself at one point, they are very proud of the GE culture and talk about it. But when, I'm sure Ritu has had to hire a few hundred people in the last 9 months, if not more. I'm sure the same is the case with Dell and all these other large organizations where people are getting inducted through a computer screen, where most of the trainings, and all of the other things, including probably training around prevention of sexual harassment, integrity and things like that are happening online. How do you drive culture in a situation like that? What do you do to make sure that these critical messages, that what is right behavior, and while this might have been okay in your previous organization, here in this organization, this is how we behave. How do you drive that, especially with, most organizations now have a very large younger population who are probably straight out of a educational institution where, behavior was different, and their concept of social media, their way of dealing with people in a virtual world is very different from probably at least people from my generation. So in that kind of an environment, what do you advise your clients to do to make sure that that cultural construct is properly created in their mind?
So Indranil, there's data that shows that the majority of sexual harassment happens at two levels. One, against people who are new to the organization because you don't really know how to navigate the system. You're at a position where you've just joined the organization. It's not going to look good on your CV if you leave. You're scared because the perpetrator is usually somebody more senior, and that's the target group that they say faces the maximum harassment within a corporate environment. And then if you go to a manufacturing environment, it's the population that's not very well educated. And because they're so dependent on a supervisor or a contract to get them that daily wage or that daily assignment, you're pretty much at the mercy of that person. So you don't speak up. And these are the two target areas. If you study across board, you will find that this is your most vulnerable group. So having this information imparted and empowering people at the time that they join the organization is really important. Do it through an orientation program, do it through you have brilliant modules. I know I recommend them to my clients because I found it so comprehensive, and it talks about everything. Do that and tell them that what their rights are and educate people, because I think a lot of people are not aware that sending an inappropriate message on a WhatsApp group is as much sexual harassment as a one-on-one interaction. And they come back arguing to say, but I didn't mean to do it. I sent it. I wasn't even the author. I received it as a forward and I've only put it out. And they will argue that the case for why it's not. And it's so important to tell them at the start, this is it. There's no bending of rules. You can't say I work in media and advertising and that's why the F word is acceptable in my industry. So you kind of set the ground rules at the start. But I think what works additionally, and you can't only rely on a module to take it forward, we always recommend to leadership that when you do your town halls, you have to talk about this, and not just talk about it to say that this is zero tolerance, but to say, look, last year we got X number of cases, of which 65% led to separation from the organization, because for us, it's not acceptable behavior irrespective of designation and rank. So I do believe that while we educate people who enter the organization and set the values for them through sessions like the ones you do virtually, I think that whole tone on top and leadership conversations and a CEO or an MD addressing it through a town hall, my experience has been that the more you speak about it, the better the environment. You know, a lot of people shy away. It's a sensitive conversation. How do you talk about sexual harassment? How do you talk? And I keep saying the more clinical you make the conversation, it's like saying, look, compliance, you can't smoke in the factory. It's the same, it's zero tolerance. You don't talk about these things openly, and you should. So I always think a combination of these two, you know, your compliance, which is going through the training, but also your leadership messaging, a combination of this works both ways, and hold leadership more accountable. Uh, you know, if you see somebody misbehaving and they're on a senior leadership, set an example by saying designation is not important, we're driving behavior. So I think that's what I've seen work in all organizations as a ground rule.
Excellent. So that brings me to you, Ritu, again. Again, large organization, manufacturing setups, office setups, all sorts of different setups, to drive a single message in a time like this when so many of these people, I know that in some of the manufacturing units which have been shut, people are effectively, not working. While they are technically working from home, there's not a lot of work that they're doing. And that, the idle mind adds to additional, there is empty time. So people end up, sending things which they otherwise, if they were in a proper work environment, working full time, they probably wouldn't even have the time to think about. How do you, constantly engage in an organization as diverse as yours, as large as yours, to drive a message which is, as Sonal said, not so easy, sensitive, different, straight out of society, different kinds of people, different age groups, but one single message that there is nothing which is okay. Not even one F word is okay. Not even one WhatsApp message is okay. How do you drive that? How easy or difficult is it? What kind of steps does an organization like yours do? If you can just help our audience understand, what can they do to make sure that this message gets passed on uniformly across, all different kinds of employees, irrespective of where they're located or, how young or old they are, etc.
Yeah, and Indranil, and I think that's a challenge that has always existed as we as a company have evolved. I think the message, the what is the same, right? It doesn't change for people. We have people, like you said, in large construction projects business, industrial business, veterans, 20, 30 years in the industry. And then we have people on our IT digital side, which are fresh out of very, young generation, Gen Zs and millennials, and we sort of categorize them like that. But the message remains the same. How you deliver is what changes. And you have to realize what motivates people. What are the value system that a certain set of people carry? What are their barriers in terms of receiving that message? And you have to customize that message. I mean, this is our responsibility as a functional team, as we partner with communication, we partner with HR, and most of all, we partner with leadership. Just like you find different ways of motivating employees, you find different ways of communicating with them. And frankly, like if you ask people who belong to a more younger generation, what appeals to them? Does money appeal to them? Do they care about culture? And what we've realized is they really do care about associating themselves to a certain brand, and they probably even more than their compensation. So they want to be associated with companies where they feel like they have the independence to speak up, to voice their opinion. And there's a flip side to it, right? Like we were just talking about social media. Let's take that for an example. Everybody has an urge to express themselves on social media. Nobody likes to be restricted in terms of what they express and how they share. And we had to really up that ante in terms of, again, especially in this time, not just driven out of the virtual setting, but just seeing externally what's happening in social media, both in the Western world, in around racism, around people voicing their opinions. So how do you balance that personal freedom with the impact it could have on your work environment. And we had to, have a very carefully thought out messaging to employees that, look, sure, you can express yourself, but if you identify yourself as a GE employee, then you need to be responsible about the message you're sending out there. And does it impact your work culture? Like if you are a very senior leader and you go out there and say, oh, by the way, I hate a certain race of people. Sure, it could be your personal opinion, but then what happens to the people you're working with in the company, and how does that impact your work culture? And when you sort of, it's not easy to send that message across, but it has to be carefully thought out. You have to present it as a scenario, as a case. What happens when somebody posts something like this? So we really had to up our drive on just how to manage your online presence, what to be careful of, how do you communicate with each other. And while we respect a personal space that every employee has, we also keep reminding them that they are a GE employee, they have signed up to a certain code of conduct. And frankly, the lines between professional and personal are getting blurred even by the day. And therefore, when you expect that there is a certain personal appreciation when you are at work, remember that there is a certain professional responsibility when you're not at work, when you're not physically working. So I think just having those conversations, in my view, are much more impactful than a training. Training is the bare minimum. You have to get it out. But how do you digest and ingest that message is through having those conversations and frankly sharing real examples. Because again, tone at the top, mood at the middle, those are basic. But if we are not walking the talk, people actually see more on how we behave than listen what we say. So I think we have to model those behaviors, and we have to know that people are watching us on how we are making a decision, how we are reacting to a situation, what action we are taking when somebody who's a high performer, maybe very senior in the company, indulges in misconduct. And those examples have to be visible to people.
No, thank you. That's very, very valuable, and that's something that we've all experienced. That many organizations seem to have these differential treatment depending on how important the person who is indulging in misconduct is, and there is always that tendency, at least in organizations that sometimes we have dealt with, to kind of say that, okay, this seems to be a one-off whenever it's from someone who they don't want to terminate. Whereas for an exactly similar situation, it's a lot easier conversation when they have no problems in terminating the person. Which brings me back to you, Anandita. There is a general belief that in any case, statistics suggest that around 20% of women actually raise a concern when they are faced with sexual harassment in the workplace, mostly for reasons that I think already Sonal and all of you have suggested, especially in the early part of one's career when you've just joined. Even in a non-virtual environment, you feel that you will probably lose your job if you raise a concern, especially since most of the people you're likely to raise concerns about are way more senior than you. Now, in this current situation, when everybody is working from home, those numbers are likely to be even lesser. I mean, if it was 20% in the normal world, then in the current world, it's probably 15% or 10%. Who knows? Now, in that kind of a situation, how does an HR professional like you, how do you encourage team members, young women colleagues who have just joined, or even obviously the senior level, to trust the system to be fair and ensure that there is no retribution, so that they can raise concerns without that obvious fear of losing their job, and apart from obviously all the other concerns around reputation and general panic that comes with this whole territory. But how do you do that?
Yeah, sure, Indranil. Well, I 100% agree to your point. Like, females, still now is little hesitant to come up with this, like, if they have any concern, or if they have faced any kind of incident or harassment, which is sexual in nature, they think it like, what will happen to my job? Okay, what will happen? What I'll be answerable? Somebody's at a senior position. So definitely that matters a lot. But however, what I have seen in the NIL, to my experience, as we are doing repetitive trainings, we are making both male and female employees more aware. Now time has changed. The things, and as we are doing it more, as highlighted by Ritu, the scenario based training is more effective. So that I think that making a lot of difference. And nowadays, female are more aware of, female employees, they're more aware about POSH Act, and what constitute as offensive, unwelcome behavior, and what behavior is coming under as an which is sexual in nature. And I think they are raising their voice. It also depends upon in past, if as I said, examples, we have to set in good examples. If organization have faced any such situation, how they are dealing with that situation, how they are coming up with the action they are taking, how they are doing the investigation. So that trust factor over the system and organization is definitely works wonder. And I think nowadays, females are, they are coming up, they are not, and they are very strong in filing all those complaints. And I think it's a good thing. Yeah, yes, we still have long way to go. Things is getting improved in, if you look at the IT industry, as highlighted by Sonal, the manufacturing industry, where females still are not aware of what is acts talks about, and what is we have the process and policy in place. So still there is a challenge in those industry, but yes, yeah.
Sunil, as somebody who's been, a part of a number of internal complaints committees, how is that working in this work from home environment? For example, under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, there is a requirement to have separate ICs for each different unit and things like that. Now, in a work from home environment where people have in many cases not even stayed in the city that they were originally working from, they've gone back to their hometowns, when a lot of times the nature of the harassment, like what you talked about, is happening online, where another person might be in another city. How is this whole thing of which IC looks at it? How does quorum get identified and things like that? How is that whole thing working? Is that working smoothly? Are there problems that you're experiencing? That's something that I wanted to understand.
So, given the flexibility that the Act gives you in putting together the quorum, we always choose people. Number one, we look at the designation of the people who've reported out the matter, and we choose a designation higher, because
Right.
we don't want anyone to feel that this is conflicted. Someone who's conducting the inquiry is reporting into either party and therefore may be compromised. So we look at that. The other is we completely rule out any kind of conflict of interest. Has there been a reporting relationship? Are you friends with the person? So nothing stops us from borrowing from other regions under the same umbrella and entity. And we do leverage that entire bouquet of people technically that we have access to as committee members. What we're struggling with in a lot of cases during lockdown is managing timelines.
Mm.
You want some information retrieved, you want CCTV footage to be retrieved. It's taking way longer than it did with full manpower. You've got 20-30% of workforce coming in. I think the pressure on them is because they're also doing work of other people, and that's how the spread is happening across board. So for them to pay attention to pulling out CCTV footage or retrieving certain emails or giving us certain data is not on, it's not on priority for them right now. They're so stretched that something that would take us 10 days to retrieve is really taking us up to 25 days to retrieve. Um, and I think the bigger issue for me is that the parties don't really have privacy in their homes. So
Mm.
while women will write a complaint and say, look, this is what I faced, when you want to set up a meeting with them, they don't have the privacy of a room to join a call. Their partners are at home, their spouses are there, their family is there. They may not necessarily have shared it with them, and they're not comfortable talking to us. So we've also got to wait for a time where they request coming into office. We've got to get a room for them, sanitize it, make sure that they've got enough privacy there. And both ways, even for perpetrators who we're conducting inquiries against, they're not comfortable talking in the presence of their partner and their children. So you've got to be sensitive to both sides. That's one area that I see a lot of struggle on, meeting of timelines. But in terms of getting the quorum together, we've made a very comfortable switch now from in-person inquiries to virtual. All of us, I mean, not just for these inquiries, but I think all legal proceedings have now moved in to that virtual mode. It's, I think, the only sensitivity, and I keep telling people, is that if you're recording these proceedings, and it's sometimes a good idea to record it, please don't do it in a manner where the parties are not aware that they're being recorded. So at the start of the proceedings, call it out and say that these proceedings are being recorded. And tomorrow, if they were to ask for a copy of the proceedings, please give it to them, because it's their right to have a copy of that as well. And if you're not recording it, then call it out and say that we're not recording it and nobody is allowed to record it. Those are, just maintain the hygiene of that. Other than that, we're not really struggling at all with getting the quorum together. We're managing that absolutely fine. Our struggles are more real in terms of privacy, space, time, and meeting timelines. I think that's what we're really struggling with. Not so much the quorum, not so much documentation. Physical signing, yes, has become a challenge. So we're sending out scanned copies, getting people to docu-sign it and send it back. We're all learning this new technology of how to sign out documents. But those everyone has adapted to really, really well. It's the other technicalities that we're struggling with. So that's been my personal experience through this
So
time.
that's, uh, that's understandable and most certainly insightful. We are running out of time, and we would like to end by asking each one of you in maybe 45 seconds to a minute to just tell us what you would advise female colleagues to do during this time if they are facing anything which feels like harassment to them without knowing technically whether it is or not. Just some practical advice to female colleagues across organizations on what they should do, steps they should take, so that they are heard and their problems are addressed. So maybe starting with you, Ritu, moving to Anandita, and ending with Sonal.
Yeah, what we would advise, Indranil, for females and males both, is call out the behavior then and there. I think we firmly believe we employ good people, reasonable adults. We all understand what's right and wrong. We all understand. And I think in 80 to 90% of the cases, if somebody would have called out that first instance of bad behavior, they would have prevented a very small issue from becoming a big issue. Because when you don't call out bad behavior, you are indirectly giving acceptance to that behavior, and then it encourages more egregious behavior later on. So we advise people, call it out then and there, and you would see that more often than not you just stopped it at that point in time. And then obviously talk to somebody, talk to whoever, your HRM, your manager, your colleagues. Just it's so much easier when you have related an incident that's happened then and there versus mulling over it for 9 months, bringing it to a point where it's no longer bearable, and then reporting it out. And as I want to iterate that at G, we follow very gender neutral policy, and we have maybe fewer, but we have cases where men have felt harassed and they haven't felt comfortable in a certain situation. And, we have to do service to both genders and say, look, just as you could be a victim, you may unknowingly be the perpetrator. And therefore, when in doubt, err on the side of caution, think twice before sending that text or asking somebody out, and think about the impact that behavior would have. And, you would be doing service to yourself. So I think just calling out the bad behavior when it happens and reporting it early enough and talking to somebody would be my short, advice if I have to stick to this one.
Makes a lot of sense. Yes, Anandita, over to you.
Sure, Indranil. I 100% agree with Ritu, as she has very beautifully highlighted. But just adding few points over here, Indranil. Like first thing, providing safe and as a professional working environment is, I think that's an every employee's right, whether it's a male or female employee. Okay, and to specifically to female employees, what I would like to highlight, whenever you are in doubt, okay, just don't keep it to yourself. Speak up. That's very important. Okay, so a lot of time, the female employees, they spend thinking, hey, is it only happening to me, or am I interpreting it wrong? If I'm interpreting it wrong, if I will highlight maybe to the HR or to the manager, what they will think. So you don't have to think about all this thing. Whenever in doubt, please talk to someone. You can reach out to your organization HR, you can reach out to your people leader, you can reach out to anyone whom you are comfortable. And it's not only about someone who is actually experiencing that kind of offensive behavior. It also, if somebody is observing any offensive behavior, it is happening with other colleague and you're observing it, you don't have to keep quiet. You please come up and say, this thing is happening to other employees, I want to highlight it. Maybe other person is not so comfortable or feeling comfortable to bring it up to open forum. So you can help out to other colleagues. So I think that makes a lot of difference. And obviously employees should be aware about what is happening, what is not happening. That is very important. Yeah.
Sure. And Sonal,
So, Indranil, for me, while we always encourage people to speak up, there are three main reasons why they are hesitant to. Number one, there is great fear of retaliation. Two, there is fear of breach of confidentiality. What if people get to know? And the third one is the potential reputation loss or some kind of character, uh, vilification to say, why her, why nobody else. And I think that your every organization needs to concentrate on creating an environment for people to speak up. If you really drive down that you're going to be protected through the inquiry process, your career is not going to be impacted, you're reporting it out against someone who's probably your manager responsible for your appraisal, that relationship is going to cease once you raise your concern. Your appraisal will not be negatively impacted if you were to raise a concern. I think just giving them that kind of additional information, telling a lot of people about what the interim relief is, I think plays an important role in encouraging them. Telling them how they have the option of leave, how they have the option of team changes. Those things we've seen have helped. But I think very often we don't pay attention to the conciliatory process. People want the behavior to stop. They don't necessarily want to file a formal complaint. They want some form of counseling or feedback because they may not be comfortable giving it. They want someone else to do it. And if we are able to tell them that, yes, there is a process that will give feedback, it's not a formal inquiry, it's a informal mechanism, but it's documented, recorded, and there is action taken. I think it just encourages people to speak up a little more. And as a lawyer, I will add, and then, while we say evidence is not important, sometimes when people get those messages, they panic so much that they delete it, or the other person sends the message, and now you've got this technology of delete for all and now disappearing messages. Take a snapshot of that, email it to yourself, and then delete it from your phone if you're worried about your partner or someone at home seeing it, because these are genuine concerns that people have. What if my husband finds a message on my phone and says, what have I done to encourage it? And it's a really unfortunate thing that's happening, but that's the reality. So keep the information secure, send it out to someone, and when in doubt, pick up the phone and talk to the chairperson of your committee. That's what they're there for, not just through the process. So I think just make the committee accessible to people. It's a easier way for them to pick up the phone and talk. That sending of 6 copies that the law mandates is a little too much pressure on people.
This is, I found this session to be incredibly valuable as a middle-aged man who's more likely to be the perpetrator than the victim. We oftentimes don't probably understand the nuances of the current situation. We all think of it from our own personal situations where many of us are far more comfortable now, not having to do our commute, being able to just switch on the video and get into a conversation with a colleague, oftentimes not realizing that their situation could be completely different from ours, and also oftentimes not realizing that we might be ending up behaving in a manner which is inappropriate or can be construed as inappropriate. And like one of you pointed out, it's what the other person is construing it to be more than what you think it is. So it doesn't necessarily have to be with intent. So I think what's come out today is awareness is very critical. Organizations need to be, far more concerned at this moment when people are all working from different homes, and yet are facing very similar or maybe even different kinds of harassment situations which need to be dealt with. Lady colleagues need to be encouraged. They need to be given, by walking the talk, organizations need to make sure that they feel that they're comfortable, that they will not be, there will be no retribution against them, that they will be able to get their voices heard. They will not face any consequences as a result of pointing out any kind of misconduct. And of course, the overall training mechanism, like Sonal said, many of us have come up with different training modules for doing the basic training on what constitutes sexual harassment, what is inappropriate behavior. And of course, many of us are also changing some of our examples, because we all recognize that these examples that we used to cite have become, dated because of what's happened around us now. But beyond that, to just give that feeling that this is an organization where such behavior is not going to be tolerated, and women will be encouraged to come up with complaints if they feel any kind of discomfort in the work environment. So with that, we'd like to bring an end to today's session. Thank you all for being a part of it. Really appreciate it. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the session itself has been recorded, but Ritu, Anandita, and I will now be available for any questions that you have. If you have any questions for Sonal, do let us know. We'll pass them on to her and get you the responses. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks Sonal, thanks Anandita, thanks Ritu. Really appreciate the time that you spent with us and your valuable insight on this extremely sensitive and important topic at this moment. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Indranil. Thanks for organizing.
Thanks, Indranil.
Thanks, Ritu and Anandita. Pleasure chatting with you too.
Likewise.
Whole lot of questions, and unfortunately we are already out of time, but we will try and take some of these right now, and then on the rest of them, especially the ones which have been specifically addressed to Sonal, and I saw that there was at least one which was, we will take that offline, and we will request Sonal to respond to it whenever possible. So I will start with a couple of questions which I think would be best addressed by Ritu and Anandita. So the first one is from Ganga S, which question is, as part of your discussions, it would be great if you suggest on this, women workers in manufacturing industry are threatened to file a case by thinking their family situation and not willing to face future problems, even after solving a few cases through ICC. So I guess the question, and Ritu, if you want to answer that, is how does an organization like yours address the challenges faced by women workers in manufacturing industries who are being threatened to, and who cannot file a case because of their family situation? If you have any example, anything that you can share with us.
Yeah, Indranil, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So not just manufacturing, there are many situations where women are not comfortable, either due to just worried about their reputation or cultural aspects or family pressures, to file a formal concern. While we always encourage them to file a complaint through the POSH route, we explain them the process, we give them the confidence about confidentiality, about protection from any form of retaliation. But obviously there are cases where people are not comfortable. And in those cases, we always give them the option to go via the internal, our ombuds process, where they can still report concerns. And That process again follows the exact same mechanism in terms of investigation, but barring the the legal technicality sometimes which the law imposes. So we do not in any given instance let go of a concern simply because somebody is not comfortable filing it through the POSH route. We always give them the option to go through our internal process. And I think in cases where people feel that even after a concern has gone through, they need legal assistance, while we haven't seen a situation like that, we always are always ready to provide any legal assistance that an employee requires.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Ritu. The next question from Priyanka Yadav. Anandita, in case you would be comfortable taking that, it says, in a work from home scenario, even companies have started putting more pressure on employees and asking them to work beyond normal working hours, not thinking about their health, putting so much mental pressure on them. Is this also some kind of harassment?
And then I'll not say specifically like, it will come under harassment. So there's a difference between the word harassment and, the harassment that is like, that is sexual in nature. Okay, definitely work from home has a lot of, baggage, like, extended working hours, video calls, and, sometimes there's a very less margin between your professional and personal life. Okay, so organization as well as employee, they need to balance out, the organization culture should be like that. They should follow a good work-life culture. Okay, definitely forcing someone, if you are continuously forcing someone to be on a video call, or to have an extended working hours, or to join late night calls, okay, unless until if it is a business requirement, okay, then the thing is different, can be constituted as harassment. But yeah, I will not say if it is the business requirement and sometimes the employee availability is necessary, it will not be counted as harassment. So yeah.
Sure, sure. I think the broad answer, Priyanka, is that the definition of harassment under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act does not permit all harassments to be considered as harassment under this act. Would it still be a harassment in the workplace, and can you still contemplate legal action against your employer? Is a question probably best answered by litigating lawyers, but in general sense, of course, but that would not be under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. The recourse would be under some other enactment. Time for a few more questions. So there was one question which I thought was very interesting from Alok Kumar, which says, many of our clients want to know the scope of workplace. Workplace under Section 2.0 has been defined as private sector, organization, private venture, undertaking, enterprise, institution, so on and so forth, unit or service provider, and places visited by employees. So especially clients like IGL or power companies, etc., who have outsourced activity like meter reading, incidents like offense committed by employee against customers. So Alok, as the sole lawyer remaining in the panel for the moment, I will respond to your question, but I'm sure you will be able to bring out case law, which I wouldn't even have known about. But conceptually, I would think yes, even that would constitute as sexual harassment, because the definition of workplace has been broad enough, or has been kept broad enough to cover for a situation where even a contract employee or an employee of the organization visiting a customer's house, or going and taking a meter reading, if they end up doing something which would otherwise constitute harassment under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, would get covered under the definition of workplace, which is also the recourse that most of us are taking to suggest that even when people are working from home, the home that they're doing from their work will make the home a workplace as well. There was a question from Shobha Piche, which says, is there any change in the POSH Act due to COVID work from home scenario? As of now, not that we are aware of. So that's not a question that there is no answer at the moment. A few other questions, we'll close it in 5 more minutes. Can you share the recording? Anam, I'll request the organizers to get back to you. Satyajit Gupta asks a question for Sonal. What is your experience as an IC member? Have complaints increased in the work from home virtual era? Will be good good to hear your thoughts. So that's a question. So I will request Sonal to respond to offline. Satyajit, you have another question on how effective is the training sensitization piece? Any empirical evidence, anecdotes? If either of you, Anandita or Ritu, would like to take that. That's a question from Satyajit Gupta on how effective is the training sensitization piece. So all the training that you do, we are a provider of training. So, but I think you as the recipients will be in a better position to answer from an empirical perspective.
Sure, Indranil. I think, it is very important to sensitize your employee on a periodic basis. And, for any organization, where you have thousands of employees working across India, it's not possible for, if you look at the ratio, HR per employees, okay? So it's not possible to reach out and, to train them. So I think training is the only platform where we can sensitize, we can keep them up to date on all the changes that is happening in terms of act or the process and policy. And most importantly, it should not be more as in just simple plain training, rather the scenario based training, if this is a scene, if this is a thing, or maybe experiential training. So that works wonder. So yeah.
Right. No, thanks, Anandita. And I think generally speaking, and I think one of the panelists, if I'm not mistaken, Sonal pointed out that apart from the structured training, which in many cases now happening because of large organizations through platform-driven training programs, refresher courses, etc., it's about the kind of messaging that is constantly happening from the leadership, from the top down, in a town hall that is being conducted by the CEO or the head of a business. How often or how up there is the conversation on prevention of sexual harassment? How detailed is that conversation? How seriously are genuine cases being addressed? What is the way in which cases are being addressed when they're against the senior most members of the organization? For example, very often it's a conversation that whenever I'm speaking to our new joinees, I mention it that if you find that there is a person in the organization, for example me, if you think that there is no recourse that you will genuinely get within the organization because of my position here, go and complain to the authorities under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, or go and complain to the police. But don't let this lie or die down, because that's how this gets perpetrated on an ongoing basis. So that's the broad answer, Satyajit. Don't know whether you necessarily got a full answer. Okay, next question is from Riya Mukherjee. Do you feel socialization and gender sensitization is connected to POSH? What role will training have to play in this regard? Ritu, I think this is the last question that we will have time for. If you can answer that, and with that, we'll end today's session. And the questions that we couldn't answer, we'll take them offline and try and respond to them at the earliest. So Ritu, the question, this one is for you from Riya Mukherjee.
Yeah, Indranil, I agree with the question in a sense that gender sensitization, I think it's the first step for people to just work together, recognize the differences and respect those differences that people carry to work. It's not about tolerance, it's about acceptance. It's about encouraging those differences, not just tolerating the differences. And we as an organization firmly believe that if we sensitize people on the gender differences, on respect for sexual orientation, sexual preferences, and broader, harassment types issues, it prevents a lot of those issues in future. So first step definitely is gender sensitization. I think that is what we should encourage. We have something called Right Behavior at Work sessions, which we do for all people leaders as well as for employees. And when you do that, you recognize that there is such an impact. It automatically addresses some of the harassment concerns that you see. So definitely there is a role that training and sessions, broader sessions than just harassment focus, can play a role in directly lead to resolution of harassment types issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ritu. Thank you, Anandita. Thank you so much to all the people who found the time to join today's session. We really, really appreciate it. We can see there's a lot of feedback, and we absolutely appreciate all the feedback that's coming in. There are a few questions which remain unanswered. We will try and respond to them at the earliest. But we are, the clock almost strikes 4, and we had actually blocked time to 3:45, and it's a Friday. So despite all the lockdown and working from home, I'm sure people would have other plans. So for the moment, we will end the session here. Thank you so much once again, and we hope to see you again for our next session, which should happen very soon. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your time and effort today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.